you so much, Rosal. Nista pikske neon absisi kakea no temptek no ako magnak nenaskamon. Nista kenaskom tenua kakea kiteiak okimawak napewak iskoyak uskayak. Ano tainan smentu kenaskumtin. My friends, my relatives, I'm very happy to be here. I acknowledge the elders that are here and thank them for their prayers, the chiefs that are here, the men, the women, the youth, and of course acknowledging our kind, loving Creator for this very beautiful day. To my colleagues on the executive, good morning, all the regional chiefs. We also acknowledge and lift up the Algonquins, Chief Jean-Guy White Duck, for welcoming here to his ancestral lands, his traditional territories. I lift up and acknowledge the drum group. Thank you so much for those beautiful songs. That heartbeat of Mother Earth brings people together, keeps us alive. Thank you so much for those beautiful songs. To our elders this morning for raising their pipes, the pipe ceremony, our teachings, always put the ceremonies first. Spoagan, Waipanasna Stemao, those sacred items we put first. We thank them for that. Of course, we acknowledge all the chiefs here, our friends, our relatives. I acknowledge the chair of the Elders Council, Elmer Cushane, for their prayer. Chair of the Women's Council, Therese Villeneuve. Chair of our Youth Council, Yalmer Onstab, is here. Fellow leaders, ministers that are here, welcome. And of course, a very special guest, Prime Minister Trudeau. Welcome here to our AFN Assembly, as it's the first time in many, many years that we've had the Prime Minister sit with us. We meet today at a great time of great challenge in the world and in our territories across this land. And yet there is hope and optimism for better days ahead. And I know that's how I feel, optimistic and hopeful. And I know we have much work to do together. I think of the accomplishments that we've had in the last year alone in building the awareness of First Nations priorities across Canada. We have secured Canada's full commitment to respect the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and to work with us to ensure its full implementation. We continue to press for and seek support from the Pope for the renouncement of the doctrine of discovery, because we know that is a racist, illegal doctrine used to rationalize colonialism and dispossession of our lands and waters. This February in Vancouver, our AFN will host the First Nations Forum on Energy, a chance to discuss our role in Canada's energy future, helping to shape a smarter, more responsive economy, and seeking ways that respect inherent rights, treaty rights, and our jurisdiction. We need to find that balance that is right for our economy with what is right for Mother Earth. We brought a clear message to the premiers at the Council of the Federation meeting that a Canadian energy strategy can only succeed with First Nations as full partners. That means being at all tables where decisions are being made and shaped about natural resources. That means establishing strategies to address climate change that are developed with First Nations as partners and co-decision makers. And our message was heard loud and clear on many other fronts. We worked hard to keep the pressure on all governments to work with First Nations to bring an end to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And now, the new government has stated its intention to establish a national inquiry that we and the families have called for so long. We know it's time to end the violence. We know it's time to end that violence in our communities and amongst our families and communities. It has to stop. We will continue that important work to support the families and to protect all Indigenous women and girls through the development of a national action plan. And we will work with federal and provincial governments and territorial partners, the next round table. We have carried out work in many other important areas through a mental wellness forum in Winnipeg and an expert panel on the state of specific claims. Through our collective advocacy, we've cemented the principle of rights recognition as the foundation of our new relationship with this new federal government. Over the coming 4 years, we have much work to do to unravel and replace key policies and legislation that are more focused on rights termination than on rights recognition. We have worked hard to support the day scholars in their quest for justice. We have fought for the rights of our children and against the gross funding inequities in child welfare and education. We have elevated awareness of the need to revitalize Indigenous languages across Canada, and overall we have great success in generating awareness and support for the rights and well-being of First Nations people. We are being heard, and I believe understood like never before. And that's why, as National Chief, I'm optimistic that we can bring about a change and bring about the much-needed reconciliation across Turtle Island between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples. Little more than a month ago, Canadians chose a new government. It was an interesting election for First Nations in many ways. So that warm, bright, sunny air, sunny ways, seems to be blowing across Turtle Island. And so I acknowledge and lift that up as well. For the first time ever, First Nations peoples and electors were engaged like never before in a Canadian election. And in 51 ridings where First Nations people live and work, our people voted in large numbers. And in fact, in 6 ridings, First Nations ran out of ballots. And you know what? That made a difference. Today, there are 10 members of Parliament of Indigenous descent sitting in Parliament, and 2 are sitting in Cabinet. Minister of Justice Jody Wilson-Raybould is one of them, and Minister Hunter Tutu of Fisheries. We need our people around decision-making tables. That is unheard of, Jody. That is unprecedented. Thank you so much. Jody. We were talking earlier on with Regional Chief Godfredson, you know, about the pressure on former regional chiefs now in being a part of cabinet. We got to look at Regional Chief Godfredson as the next step. We've got to see what's going to happen higher up, maybe. You never know. Canada's new government, friends and relatives, is led by a Prime Minister who has promised a change not only in tone, but in the practice of how it will govern. And as someone who traveled to Paris last week for the opening of talks on climate change, I can tell you, I see that change has already begun. When world leaders met last Monday, Canada's 4 seats for the opening ceremonies, they were occupied by 4 individuals representing Canada to be part of the opening ceremonies. The Prime Minister, number 1, was there. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Stephen Dion, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna, and myself, the Assembly of First Nations, was part of that delegation. And friends and relatives, chiefs, the message was simple. Indigenous people are a vital part of the solution, even though we have not been part of the problem when it comes to climate change. And when it was Canada's turn to speak, our Prime Minister said these words: Indigenous peoples have known for thousands of years how to care for our planet. The rest of us have a lot to learn and no time to waste. What a very powerful statement from our Prime Minister. He understands the important role of our peoples to protect our environment. He is listening. In his mandate letter to each and every cabinet minister, Prime Minister Trudeau wrote, "It is time for a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership." Very powerful direction, very powerful words. Get back to that relationship of nation to nation. Peaceful coexistence and respect between our peoples, mutually benefiting from sharing the land and resource wealth. That is so powerful again, because as the speech from the throne stated, because it is both the right thing to do and a certain path to economic growth. That's powerful statements, powerful direction coming from the Prime Minister and Cabinet, reflected in the throne speech. Chiefs, it is indeed a new day on Turtle Island. That's why I'm optimistic. But we also have much work to do. Our 400 years of shared history has brought us a massive gap in the quality of life between Indigenous peoples and the rest of Canada. So how do we close that gap? How do we get started? How do we move beyond the Indian Act? How do we exert our jurisdiction and occupy the field, create our own laws, moving beyond the confines of that Indian Act? Let me say now, I believe this Prime Minister has already taken some important first steps in the right direction, committing to work with First Nations so that every First Nation child receives a quality education. So we always say, strong on math and science, strong on literacy and numeracy, but equally as important is our identity and our languages and our customs and traditions. We walk in both worlds, so they're equally important to have those two systems work together. Here at the Assembly of First Nations, we have a full slate of regional chiefs, our colleagues on the executive, and we are working together. We are working together. We've formalized our agendas, we've formalized our portfolios, we've got our two-day meeting set out for the upcoming year, and we'll be working with First Nations leadership in each region, in each treaty territory, on traditional territories to get things done. We have the portfolios established with the regional chief at the helm of each one to ensure that our most pressing issues see action in accordance with the mandates provided by the Chiefs in Assembly. And I thank all of my colleagues for the work they've done this past year. And as our Elder Elmer says, he guides us. We're family. Have that respect and love and caring. We will have differences, but if we have that love and respect and caring, we will get things through. We will get things done together. I want to say, working together, we can and will make progress on rights, on the recognition of treaty and inherent rights and Aboriginal rights, on health care, on water, on housing, on education and infrastructure. In the year ahead, we will tackle the issues that will set us on a sound path for the future. We are opening doors in Ottawa to facilitate the work of all First Nations on the implementation and recognition of our rights and title, treaty enforcement and implementation, and realizing self-determination for Indigenous nations. This includes the important work that must follow the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. And it includes assisting First Nations in advancing their visions of positive, respectful, nation-to-nation relationships with the Crown. We will work and support each other on our respective paths to ensure we are never again poor in our own homelands. Yes, my friends, my relatives, there's much work to do. The Prime Minister has charged his new Minister of Finance with establishing a new fiscal relationship with First Nations that lifts the 2% cap on annual funding increases and moves us towards sufficient, predictable, and sustained funding. Nothing more will have an immediate impact in helping to close the gap than lifting that 2% cap and launching discussions on significant catch-up funding after decades of underfunding. We've said constantly that it's a cap on potential, it's a cap on growth. We need the funding that comes from proper intergovernmental transfer mechanisms rather than contribution agreements. We can put in place a new fiscal arrangement with the Crown that reflects the constitutional status of First Nations, one that finally embodies the spirit of sharing and caring that has guided our peoples and our ancestors in treaty relationships for so long. Prime Minister, fellow chiefs, colleagues, the job ahead of us is substantial. We did not get here overnight, but I say to you this morning, as we gather, there must be a sense of urgency. The First Peoples of Canada have suffered too much and for too long. Our people have waited in terrible conditions, suffering indignity and going without many of the basic services other Canadians take for granted. So I ask that we move quickly. We can resolve issues by working well together. From land and resource issues, to treaties and Aboriginal rights, to education and employment, to the environment, the economy. Prime Minister, everyone here, we look forward to working together in a true spirit of cooperation and reconciliation. You have made great start in changing the narrative, Prime Minister. You have reached out your hand as a treaty partner in a respectful way. It is now up to the nations of each treaty and traditional territory to seize that opportunity and shape the future, nation to nation. Chiefs, thank you for being here today. Prime Minister and ministers, thank you for being with us today. We are hopeful. We are optimistic. Let's get to work. Thank you.